Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this evening's conversation between artist Flo Brooks and Brooke Palmieri. My name's Robert Leckie, and I'm the director of Spike Island. We're really delighted to host this talk on the occasion of Flo's solo exhibition, Harmonycrumb. The show explores trans and gender nonconforming histories through painting and assemblage, mapping out speculative entanglements between Brooke's own life and the experiences of different historical figures, including military leader Joan of Arc, female husband Charles Hamilton, and physician Michael Dillon, who is also known as Lobsang Jabaka. Firstly, I'd like to briefly introduce our guests. Flo Brooks is an artist based in West Cornwall. He works across painting, collage, publication, installation, and social practice. Merging autobiography with fiction, Brooks' works coalesce around ideas of selfhood, belonging, and temporality, most often taking form in densely layered acrylic paintings that act as a kind of repository for complex feelings, memories, and social and political histories. Recently, Flo's work has been presented in solo and group exhibitions at Project Native Informant, Brighton CCA, Tramway, Somerset House, and the Hayward Gallery, to mention just a few. Brooke Palmieri is an artist, writer, and educator working at the intersection of memory, history, and gender-bending alternate realities. In 2018, they founded Camp Books, a platform and traveling bookshop. Camp Books promotes access to queer history through cheap prints, zines, workshops, installations, and the collaborative construction of archives related to LGBTQIA+ activism and the long history of gender nonconformity. Palmieri's writing has been recently featured in Loosh magazine and anthologies by Pilot Press, and their work has been exhibited at Garda, the Glasgow Women's Library, the Bower, and Chelsea Space. Before we get started, some practicalities. So this event will last around 1 hour. Over the first 40 minutes or so, Flo and Brooke will discuss Flo's exhibition at Spike Island and how this work helps us to think through queer, trans, and gender nonconforming histories. In the end, we'll open to questions and comments from the audience. If you'd like to contribute, please do share any comments or questions in the YouTube chat. Also, as a reminder, all of Spike Island's public programs seek to create an environment for critical and open-minded discussion. So we politely ask that all comments are respectful and generative for our guests and audience. This event is made possible through the West of England Visual Arts Alliance programme and is supported by Arts Council England. Without further ado, Flo and Brooke, we're very happy to have you here with us, and I'll hand over to you. Thank you.
All right, so we're recording twice.
We're recording.
I think the best way to start this off is just to start on something that really strikes me first and foremost about your work. I think is a really lovely way to frame the whole of our discussion, which is to talk about fragments and the fragmentary nature of aspects of your work. It's something I love because the fact that you have these beautiful, delicate details of fragments of badges and ephemera and show flyers and books in your work, the way in which you use and employ that kind of symbolism of fragments is a way that visualizes like just how I feel about them, which is that they're so filled with potential. They're so generative. I mean, for me, history is a raw material. Like the materiality of history is a raw creative material. And I think no matter what, the first thing to accept about the past is that it could only ever survive to us in fragments. No matter like what the preponderance of evidence is, no matter how often we've heard a story told over time, like even the best attested histories are fragmentary. And that's something that really needs to be paid attention to. And it's not something that I think is very well paid attention to in history as a discipline, or even the way history is treated in like law or religion. But it is something that I think artists are really well suited to tell us about encountering the past. So I guess I just wanted to ask you more about your relationship to the fragmentary and how you incorporate it into your paintings.
Yeah. Well, firstly, I love that you get all that from looking at my work. That's like, just like means a lot. And it's a really great thing to hear, because I guess, when I was thinking about fragments. Yeah, I mean, I feel like there's so many different, I could take this in lots of different directions, like the way that I think about it. But I totally agree with you in terms of like, I think that artists and imaginative thinkers are so in terms of sort of thinking through histories and navigating histories, are so kind of do it in all kinds of like incredible sort of ways that make sense. And I suppose, yeah, a couple of things like that are more kind of in relation to the work, the Harmonycrumb, the exhibition. Fragments for me, definitely, I'm always trying to think of, or like try to like get nearer to describing or expressing kind of the experience of life, of like kind of life in flux, and of kind of environments and spaces, and yeah, the materiality of our lives, like being this like constantly evolving thing, this thing that's always generative, hopefully, and that is so much potential in all these little things that we surround ourselves by, but also everything that has kind of influenced us and made us who we are. Like we're always like, that's always something that is like, for me, that's always kind of emerging. And I love thinking about sort of like also fragments, like often, you know, the smallness, like in terms of scale, because I think again, like in terms of like, when I think about, say, even as a younger person and sort of, you know, learning about history or like this historic moment, and there being like, you know, oh, I mean, it's kind of too boring to say, but all of that, there's something about paying attention to, yeah, the tiny things that get left behind, all those sort of small moments, and kind of like the kind of almost like the intimacies of that, like this, there's so much more to it than the kind of the grand narrative. And so, I mean, I don't know, there's loads I could say about fragments and sort of collage. Like I think about my paintings more like collages, or collage is such a big part of that, and that for me is like all about bringing fragments together and sort of seemingly like disparate images or ideas, and as a way to like create new meaning and new possibilities for like imagining futures, and which involves, you know, looking at parts of the past or whatever. I don't know if that's made any sense, but
I love it. It makes so much sense. And it is, to me, something, it feels like a queering of history to take the quotidian and the little like bits of debris from our everyday lives.
Yeah.
That often don't survive. But when you encounter them, remember with them, they're so charged and evocative. And it almost, it queers history, not only because it's about taking the everyday, the things that often don't make it into a lot of the larger, or only now are increasingly making it into museum collections, but also I think about the real undue burden that like monumental things have, or maybe we should just say expensive things. Like if I have an expensive outfit, I don't wear it very much. So it actually doesn't get the charge of my sweat in it, because it's so expensive. I'm afraid to use it. So in my material history, it's not going to say a lot about who I was, but the shirt I wore every day that's like with my pheromones or whatever is my life. And I think it's a queering of history to destabilize the notion that we have to have really expensive, grand, monumental things that say something about us, which no one has the time or money for. But instead, you know, it's like the activist badges and the tickets to a concert. Those are the things that not only are just more honest about a person's existence, but so much more evocative. And I know when I've worked in archives and with placing historic materials in front of people, it's those little things that get people talking. It's harder to get people talking about a monument or about a huge work of art, you know, but with yours, I just feel like there's this incredible possibility. You use the word possibility, and it so is it. You really create a world to draw people in. And I know when I see the fragments that you choose to include in your painting, I think about, it lets me, it's very generous in the sense that it also allows me to kind of reflect on the fragments that also mean something to me that have passed through my hands in my own life, which I also think is kind of amazing. I don't know if you would agree with this, but like fragmentary tends to have like a negative connotation. You know, it's seen as like incomplete or not whole or somehow lacking. And I think your paintings, which I hope in saying this, I'm tantalizing everyone about what we're about to look at. But I think these works that we're about to look at sort of suspend judgment on the fragmentary as like a negative connotation and is a little bit more positive and even celebratory of it. Which isn't to say you don't shy away from like negative or sad themes. It's just that you don't judge the power that a slip of paper could have in being a fragment. I don't know.
I love that. I really love that because I mean, I thought about that a lot, definitely whilst making the work, but I guess more in general, just within my practice, like, you know, in terms of, like a word like fragmentary, which definitely does have that kind of negative connotations, and how, how kind of important it is for me, definitely to incorporate. I mean, it's not just all sort of I'm more interested in kind of those spaces of friction and of tension, which of course will engage with more kind of, I don't know, material or narratives that are, say, difficult or upsetting, or just, I don't know, there's some kind of discomfort there. But that I mean, what was I going to say about, I'm definitely like, I really wanted these works particularly for to kind of think about things sort of coming apart or being held together, but like actually like that isn't, there's so much to be kind of valued in that, and also it's just kind of how it is for everybody, and it is something that like I find just like kind of amazing how people, I don't know, just like even walking around like down the road or whatever, and noticing just all the different ways that people are sort of either kind of adorning and embellishing and sort of building their houses, or like their kind of what they're wearing, or, you know, how they're moving through space, and these sort of, there's like a fragility to it. And I don't know, and I'm just like, oh, but I don't know, there's so many different ways of looking at it, but I definitely like, it's really nice that you see that, because that's something that I would really hate it if the things I made just didn't express that and just felt really kind of like heavy, and, you know.
Yeah, I think we should get into this, share a screen so people can sense of what I'm talking about, because what I think when I'm talking about generosity, it's like, what I mean is that you embed your subjects and the objects of your works in these just like really incredibly fertile environments. Like they're cradled and contextualized and like nestled into these little moments in time in a way that it feels like they're held really beautifully, which then again is a way of, for me, it helps me accept loss, accept death, accept the fragmentary nature of life, accept all these things. And at the same time, it lets me feel optimistic about that. Like in the loss or fragmentary nature, what am I now creating to fill those silences or gaps? Or when you know, if something is only a torn little slip of something, what does that make room for elsewhere in my life? It kind of gives that sense, again, of what you say, flux. So let's just have a look. This is just to simulate a little bit of what it could be like to walk around the exhibition, and then we're going to go and look in some detail at a few paintings. I wonder, Flo, if you I'll just scroll through, and if you want to if you want to describe a little bit about the hanging, good for you, maybe your mentality. I think there's also something to say, what environment have you created here in hanging these works as you have? Because that also like a part of the show and a part of what's the fertility of it, the vibrance of it, everything spilling off the canvas and its excessiveness.
There are, for people that haven't seen it or don't know much about the show, there's seven hanging paintings which are suspended from the ceiling, and they're at slightly different heights because they're different sizes. They're all fairly large. The largest is about 2 by 2 meters. This one here is 2 by 2 meters, so it gives you a sense of the scale. And there are these floor-based assemblages. So there's the hanging paintings and the floor-based assemblages, and they're made up of lino flooring cutouts, which are kind of undulated, so they don't sit flat on the floor, and they each have an assortment of kind of handmade objects which are made out of cardboard and cloth and paint. And I should also say that the hanging paintings, they're acrylic on linen paintings, which I've sewn onto larger pieces of fabric, and then there are smaller little bit painted kind of fragments or blobs that sort of spill out into the fabric, and the fabric's dyed and painted into. And then on the walls, you'll see there are these little painted, more of these kind of little painted shapes, which, yeah, sort of jump out and sort of extend out of the paintings. They're sort of, but the colors and the shapes are kind of pulled from paintings, but also sort of very loosely sort of gesture towards a sort of journey you might take through the space. And then so one of the floor-based assemblages is in the main space, which is a really huge light-filled room, and then the rest of them are positioned on this sort of space that wraps around the main gallery space and then goes into Asma's show around the back. And some of the floor-based works are there are more, if you're at the show and you're encountering them, you might see quite distinct or like explicit references to the paintings. Like you might be like, oh, I've seen a lilac shoe somewhere, and it appears in one of the works, or the skull. So some of them, there is a direct relationship to particular paintings and particular individuals and their histories that I'm thinking about. But there are objects, motifs and objects which are also more personal and sort of more about the way that I'm relating to these histories and the material I'm looking at. So it's this sort of merging of these two things. So there's a sort of jumping back and forth, I should say. That's the kind of what I wanted there to be between the hanging works and the floor-based works, and that's also through how I made them. But I don't know whether, I don't have to talk about that bit. I don't know if that's interesting, the sort of process of how I made them, but
I think that's very interesting. The conversation between what's happening in the works on the floor and the painting. The painted
okay.
work.
I won't, if I go on for ages, then feel free.
No, okay. Like I said, I'm here as a fan, so I want all the nitty gritty behind the scene details. So
okay. Well, some of it might actually be a bit boring, but
we'll see. We say what you want, and I'll be the judge of that.
Okay. But yeah, in terms of like how, I guess maybe the way that I relate to like the relationship between the two works, like why I've chosen to make both paintings and these assemblages on the floor, I have to sort of go back in time to when I was first thinking about making this show, and I was thinking about these particular the materials that I was looking at, these fragments that I keep talking about, but that relates to a number of historical figures that just had some kind of that had like a resonance, or like a kind of I just sort of felt some sort of interest, fascination, kind of a connection to, and wanted to spend time sort of seeing what else I could uncover about these people, but also about, I'm thinking about particular spaces. So often I start off with a physical location for a painting. That's often like where I start, and I can sort of think about building up an architecture. And then often they're like other narratives I'll sort of bring into that. So with the floor-based assemblages, you'll see a lot of shoes, like a lot of cardboard shoes that are sort of on the piece of the lino, coming off the lino. And when I was thinking about these individuals, I really wanted to, I sort of did it without thinking. I was like, I'm just going to make a shoe. I'm going to imagine the shoe of, say, Charles Hamilton, who worked as a quack in the like 1740s in Somerset in the UK. And I mean, apart from looking at images of like what I imagine a kind of quack, someone who worked as a quack at that period in time, what they might wear, like I have no idea. I mean, you know, I would just, but I'm like totally fascinated, and I love sometimes I like just making a thing to sort of, it feels like getting closer to an idea or a narrative, because you're spending like 5 hours making this cardboard thing, and I'm trying to think about, like, you know, what the shoe might have felt like, what the color of it might have been, and
Yeah,
so that sort of, sorry.
Oh no, continue. I can.
What it might have, all kinds of questions, just, you know, like it's sort of a way of like connecting to a whole other world, I guess. Yeah, it's just, you know, welding. But so I wanted to make a one shoe for each of the different people I was thinking about. And then once I made shoes, I started making other objects, and some of those were as I was looking through different like material. So it might be a newspaper clipping, or like reading an autobiography, or like a part of a letter, or it might, or also going to physical places now that had like some kind of relationship to some of the people I was thinking about. And those so it might just be something there that I would like just sort of pull from that environment. So something I might see in the marketplace that maybe in the moment doesn't make a lot of sense, but there's something sort of intuitive about, I don't know, this has something, and I would kind of make these things. And then as I was sort of building them up, I realized I was sort of doing a similar kind of thing that I do with the paintings anyway, is that I'm sort of trying to build a space, and the sort of thinking about the idea of sort of bringing, how am I relating to some of these you know, the bits of these like fragments that I'm looking at, like what do they, you know, what is it about this particular thing that like does sort of, I don't know, it makes me feel kind of uncomfortable, or I don't know, sad, or so it's sort of these things that I would then sort of trace back to. It might be like particular kind of experiences I've had, or sort of moments. And that's the kind of the way that I started to construct the floor works. So there was sort of always kind of back and forth between the paintings and the assemblages. I don't know if that.
I love that. There are a few things that really resonate with me about that, and as a kind of way of approaching the past. I mean, something that I kept hearing you say that I'm glad, and actually relates to another question I had for you, was you kept talking about the intuitive nature of your work. And I think that intuition is one of the most important faculties that we could apply to recovering gender nonconforming history.
Yeah.
So much of what survives, we have not been taught to look at, let alone recover. A lot of gender nonconformity happens in a language that does not relate to the LGBTQIA categories that are kind of deployed today.
Yeah.
And there's a wide world of people doing really freaky stuff and living their lives in really unapologetically freaky ways. How those lives end is neither here nor there. Sometimes very tragically, sometimes they just disappear and we have no way of knowing. But it does take a whole hell of a lot of intuition to see something that and apprehend its affinities with ourselves nowadays. And it's really the only way that queer and trans history has been made, using those moments of intuition, because in a lot of cases, we've been taught not to follow our intuition. And that's something being clear. From childhood, our intuition about who we are is often the first thing that is suppressed or knocked out of us. We spend a lot of our lives recovering that and using that as a method to not only recover ourselves, but to recover a sense of the past, I think is crucial. So I love that you said that. And then what you were saying about creating the sculptural objects, I think is really another really important sort of almost methodological point you could make about the past, which is sometimes when there's an absence of a record to be found and recovered, you kind of have to make the thing you're looking for before you know how to find it or what to do with it. So the idea that you would be kind of creating like a collateral archive of the materials you want to survive, like George 18th century buckled men's shoe, but it's a really, that material history is really important to imagine the labor of its production, because again, outside of our very contemporary categories of identification, people used objects of everyday wear and tear and labor to create their gender, to create to flag their sexual desires. And that's certainly the case with clothes across time. So especially the idea that you would go for shoes, I think is a really powerful historic statement about how people fashion themselves. And like you see, I mean, it's still to this day, you see a painting and you see what some of those shoe choices and
it signals
going on here.
Exactly.
Hear about this. It's a way in, and once you have that way in, you can start to reconstruct a much larger world. So it's so amazing to hear about the creation of that in real time and think about how it teaches us to better work with history or the past that's happened. I think that's a good moment just to go in on now some of the details within the paintings, if you'd be.
Absolutely.
Something that I really and this relates to something I was thinking, you're talking about something really rewarding for me as a viewer of these paintings. So this is If I Lapse for Charlie Wilson, and there's a little detail of it. It's just this sense of unlocking symbolism. So some of the symbolic elements or fragmentary elements of your paintings, I see and I know what they are. And I find that really rewarding. But then it creates this excitement in me because I want to then unlock the further symbolism that I don't know yet. And it gives me something forward to, like, oh, what do I have to read, or what do I have to find, or where do I have to go to kind of unlock more further meaning. And it almost has like this, going back to intuition, and it almost has a spiritual nature about it. Like I kind of almost feel like I could get back to the way people must have felt in, sort of medieval Renaissance Europe, when what they encounter when they go into a church is like an altarpiece or a stained glass window that gives them these flashes of color and symbolism. And regardless of how much money they had or what their jobs are, these like people going to these churches had a symbolic world to interpret or to find mysterious. And I feel that way with there's like this altarpiece quality to things. And so I wondered if I was reading my own spiritual like desires and practice into what I was seeing, or if you have a spiritual practice and like what your investment in this kind of symbolism is. And I feel like you talking about making pilgrimage to places and using your intuition kind of already maybe answered the question, but I love to hear you talk more about that, as well as go into some of the details in these paintings. We've got a few of them, so let me know.
Of course.
Start
Um,
healing.
do I have a spiritual practice? I don't know. I mean, I guess I don't know. I don't really know how I relate to that really. I was like, for this work, which isn't less about, it's more about religion. I was thinking about religion a lot because some of the individuals that are sort of, one of the people that we'll have a look at an image of was a faith healer, and also because I was sort of constantly going back in time, and I would see things, and I would be reminded of, I guess, my kind of formative experiences as a young, like, gender non-conforming person, having like really no clue about like queer and trans histories, and just sort of going about doing my thing, like trying to figure out, what the hell's going on. But this, I was brought up Roman Catholic, and we used to not like.
I was brought up Roman Catholic.
Were you? Okay.
Now we really know why we're both
Now,
here.
okay, this is it.
Lay it on me.
But not like, well, in my immediate family, it wasn't like super strict, but it was there, like my mum's side of the family, it is it's strong. It's like that sort of, I don't know, way of looking at the world, way of being, that kind of lens is like, I feel like has had a really, well, whilst I was making this work, I was like, wow, I really can kind of feel that, or like the kind of weight of that now, and thinking about what particular experiences of growing up, and thinking about gender and sexuality, and how that sort of intersected with a kind of going to church, and the way that my just certain kind of ideas that so anyway, I'm going slightly off topic, but I guess what I'm saying is, in terms of a spiritual practice, like, I mean, like this, I don't know, I mean, making like, I mean, these paintings take such a long time to make, like hours and hours and hours, like that has to be
this level of scale and meticulousness. Yeah, it looks like an act of devotion of hours and hours. Yeah,
it kind of has to be. And I like have so much sort of like in terms of the material that I'm looking at, the people that I'm thinking about, like I'm so interested, but I also really want to be so like sensitive, and be really like, I mean, I'm always sort of thinking through questions and kind of issues I have with things that come up, but also being like, trying to be really sort of like sensitive, and sort of approach things with like real care, and bringing in like, particular animals. So in the painting before this one, so this one, which is called If I Lapse. So I was thinking about this individual called Charlie Wilson, who was a house painter, and then a quite like well-established ship painter, and I mean like painting like interior decoration in cruise ships in the 1900s, and he, like, what I found was a newspaper clipping of, and actually there's quite a few, that when Charlie Wilson ended up in a workhouse, like at the age of about 60 or something, I might have got that slightly wrong, but certainly in sort of later life after an accident, and there was this particular, there was lots in this, like quite an amazing sort of newspaper clipping, because I mean, as you know, when you're looking through a lot of archival matter that's to do with gender non-conforming and queer and trans people, it's so often, it's really it can bring up a lot of stuff, can't it? And
it's really hard work.
Yeah.
And I have definitely experienced, especially around Michael Dillon, looking through archival material at the Wellcome collection and just like having to put it down and walk away to like take a breath, because it's
Yeah.
In spite of like the incredibly like vibrant aspects of gender nonconforming people's lives that shine through these moments, a lot of it is very harsh. And so you feel like you're on some level liberating their stories to put them in kinder, gentler, more convivial contexts where people can encounter them. And then they also, these people who have died, who are our forebears, can get remembered in a different way. But that work of liberating them from those files and folders can be really upsetting, or the newspapers or whatever, especially when it's newspapers, because the sensationalization and the focus on the shock of deceit.
Oh God, yeah.
As a trope is incredibly insulting, and it's, I think, something that really persists and pervades our culture today. The
Yeah.
structure of their like reveals of their stories is
My God.
often, it's a kind of violence that's so pervasive today still. So yeah, it's hard work.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, it is. Yeah, you're right. It's
I'm with you. I know that, like, I know the high highs and the low lows of just
yes. Oh my word. Yes.
very
Totally.
emotional.
Yeah, really emotional. And this clipping was that I was reading about this person, Charlie Wilson, was actually like different in terms of, it's interesting because of course, like when you're reading things, particularly say a newspaper clipping, I mean, I'm saying all the stuff that I'm sure you think about all the time, Brooke, but like you're learning more about A, the journal, B, the writer, and C, like the kind of socio-political and kind of economic conditions of that time, less so about the actual individual. You might sort of glean like something, but it sort of, I mean, it tells you more about the attitudes towards that person. And this one was a very, like, I describe it as kind of quite sort of jovial, quite sort of, I mean, there are moments in it where it's like, oh God, this is difficult, but it's on the whole like quite a sort of, I don't know, it's quite a soft kind of interview with this person, Charlie Wilson, and the interviewer who came to the workhouse at this time because Charlie Wilson was had to, of course, take all the work clothes off and was put into the workhouse clothes, and that's when, of course, his birth sex was discovered, and I was using air quotes then. And so then, for whatever reason, a journalist, this is a story, a journalist comes and talks to Charlie Wilson, but it's like very sort of, I don't know, it's very English and it's very kind of like soft, and there are a few things in it that I just was quite compelled by. Like, I think so much of it had to do with the fact that Charlie Wilson was kind of upper middle class, educated, like protected by his whiteness, like so many things that were sort of, you can kind of see in this. But it's also the story of like a really, person who, it seemed, my interpretation of it was like talked about, like the title, "If I Lapse," is from this sentence that Charlie Wilson's quote as saying, like, "If I lapsed into carelessness," and it was about the idea of like, I always have to be on my guard, essentially. Like, I'm always working, I always have to be able to like get on with the job, and I always have to sort of have this kind of, there has to be a kind of wall or like a gap between me and my colleagues, because there's always this, the danger in being, in Charlie Wilson's like assigned sex at birth, being like found out and, losing your job. And if you lost your job, like, blah, 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 all of that stuff. But I'm going off on a slight tangent. But yeah, I just found it, so many things about that were like really, I don't know, yeah, just really sort of compelling for me. So the image of the kind of the face is slightly spliced. The image is, there's a kind of body with sort of multiple arms in the paint. This is the painting I'm talking about now. And they're sort of curling back over, sort of decorating, one sort of rolling, one sort of painting part of a kind of cruise ship. So I sort of wanted to articulate that sense of like contorting your body to, you know, this kind of relentless sort of work ethic in order to stay invisible to some degree, or to kind of maintain that sense of, or maintain work and be safe as well. But I don't know, but it's so complex, all of these different parts that you sort of, this is, you know, a factor involved here. And also there was a lovely description of like Charlie Wilson apparently loved birds and kept birds in a garden. So there's an African grey parrot who's actually, we adopted, when I was much younger, we adopted an African grey parrot who was so gorgeous, but like completely institutionalized. And we wanted to like encourage him to fly in the house. I mean, and then take him to a African grey rescue place, but he just wouldn't. It was so traumatic for him, I think, moving out of his cage. But yeah, so there's sort of things that will be like kind of personal that I'm bringing out in as well, but they kind of relate to me relating to him. See what I mean?
But that too, it's like the historian Natalie Zeman Davis calls it like collateral evidence. Like when you know something to be true about something, so you knew that Charlie loved birds, but you don't really have a sense or can't recover the specifics of that, you give your own collateral experience to embellish and to tell that story.
Yeah.
And she argues historians do that all the time. Like it's always happening. We're always, there is no, there's no objectivity. There's always a bias. And so I think the way you do that is really lovely. Something you were saying about the newspaper article brought to mind another book that I really love by Emily Skidmore called True Sex. And it takes place in just this time period. It's about most like who we consider to be transmasculine people, trans men today, people who were able to trans the gender assigned at birth to take on male labor, live their life as men. But something that she does in tracking their descriptions across newspaper articles is that she shows that the local press tends to be kinder to its citizens. So when you have an interview between someone, the person that it involves on a local level, you get more information, and the information is presented more sympathetically. And it's actually the birth of the syndicated journal, the syndicated press. Like newspapers owned by the same company, sending out the same messaging across many different newspaper events. They're different arms, like a kind of like early like Murdoch press. It's that syndication that is cruel and sensationalizing and violent and clipped in its descriptions of people. And that's where you lose all the local flavor. And with the local flavor, all of the like moments of tolerance or moments of acceptance or moments of even celebration and appreciation for a person's like hard work and daring do. In a lot of cases, like men like Charlie, like, again, and this is, there are like racial arguments. He can do this because of his whiteness on some level. Like they're celebrated because they're hardworking guys. Trying to make money in a way that is legible to society. So, and that also gets lost by a syndicated press. And it's a really important act of recovery to try to find the source material that doesn't do that doesn't slide people's experiences into one monstrous, cartoonish tabloid description. So it's actually amazing to hear you.
That's so interesting
about working with that source material in a way that again really opens it up to its fullest potential. I wonder if you want to talk about this painting, because it did come up, the dream Jean and Jean d'Arc.
It's called The Dream for Père Jean and Joan of Arc. And so I was thinking about this individual who was later in their later life was known as Père Jean, who is a Belgian faith healer. and died in the 1960s, I think, and who had like incredible kind of biography, but also kind of created kind of what it seems like from what I've sort of read about this person, created these throughout their life, sort of embellished and created these like alternate kind of biographies, just like really interesting. But there was this, I came across this I was sort of interested in this person later in life. I guess because I was thinking so much about being raised Roman Catholic and going to church, and people in my family who still have a very strong faith, and kind of those connections, those relationships. But this person later in life lived in this, what's described in this, like in an article I was reading, in this sort of small castle in the north of Brussels that's sort of falling to bits, and they are kind of live with, apparently, according to this person, some wild animals, like Pigeon apparently was when they were a much younger person, like a teenager, sort of ran away from home and joined the circus and were a lion tamer. And they talk, there's sort of talk about how in this castle there's a photograph of this lion, the lion that they tamed, called Brutus. So in the painting there is, like, I wanted to include Brutus because I, also thinking about, well, I'm also always interested and love thinking about the relationships we have to like our non-human animal friends and the non-human animals around us, and those sorts of who we kind of share our lives with. And also in another, I think there was in another article, there was this talk about the way that this individual was talked about in the press, because they're also as stigmatic, that's the term, isn't it? When
all throughout my childhood I was afraid of the stigmata, but yeah, it's when supposedly you receive the wounds that Christ did. I don't know why that was like my greatest fear as a kid.
Well, that you would experience that yourself.
I was so good, I was so well behaved, I was afraid I was too good and would get the stigmata.
Oh my god. Oh,
sorry to interrupt with that little tidbit. Anyway,
I don't think I ever thought about it actually, but I don't know. Yeah, why? So this and at that time there was kind of their story sort of reached the press, and there was talk about, this person is like, there was a kind of connection drawn to Joan of Arc, and then there was sort of, did I read this? I was thinking about, I don't know whether actually, sometimes you read, you're like, did I read a thing or did I just imagine a thing? Maybe I imagined it, but there was a kind of description of Père Jean sort of dreaming about Joan of Arc, and I was thinking about, like, all of these sorts of figures, and the idea of this kind of lineage of kind of queer and trans kind of ancestors, and and sort of this connection through time. And I love the idea of, like, maybe when we go to bed at night and we are dreaming about, what would it be to be with this person. So this sort of, in the painting I've described a kind of a figure in bed that sort of cradled it in the arms of this sort of two-headed person who's kind of a Joan of Arc type composite, but just that sort of communion, or that sense of kind of being looked after through time, like over time, or some sense of kind of affinity or closeness or something.
And I love that so much. I think that reminds me of a quote I think that I sent to you by this queer sort of theorist historian, Heather Love. She wrote this book called Feeling Backwards, and she has
I love it.
And it's something to do with what's happening in art today, what's happening in activism. There is always this, at any moment of the past 150 years of like expressly queer activism, you always see people looking back and trying to find a history. It's always been part of the sort of will to exist in the world almost. And then Heather Love puts it this way, where they say the longing for community across time is actually like a crucial feature of the queer historic experience. And then argues that it's like one produced by historic, like where we grow up isolated as queers.
Yeah.
And then we become aware of the very damaged quality of the archive that kind of survives about our stories. So to fill that in, it's like we're always dreaming and we're always longing to find this past genealogy that we're a part of. And I think that's a really beautiful impulse, to not only to see at work in these works, but then also to kind of like be able to kind of catch the excitement and enthusiasm for it. It's like, oh, I want to do that now too for myself. I'm aware that we have a few other images for you to talk to, but I'm also aware that we're getting to the point in time where we might want to open things up to ask some questions.
Well, we can just, I don't know, should we go through the images and then
the images real quick, but just like to let
everyone
know in the audience, start thinking of your questions because we're going to open it up really soon. But first we're going to look at Spider the Vaults, if that is the
meaning. Go for it. I don't know whether I don't want to take up too much time. I won't. Maybe we should just look at the images, and if people want to ask questions about particular things, then
okay. I mean, the time we have is for you, so you're not taking it up.
Okay.
Well,
I don't know.
There's in for time right now, so do not worry. But yeah, this is a Spider in the Vaults, and then the final work that I picked was about Lapsang Javaka, Michael Dillon.
Yeah,
I love him, and I know you've mentioned him a few times as like one of the a really generative figure for behind this show. So maybe we should end on that and then open it up to questions. I see some coming in.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, and he sort of, this painting is slightly higher than the others because I wanted it to be like he was flying in from what do you call it? Like it's like flying in from the sky or something.
Yeah.
Down to but yes, if people want to ask particular questions, then go for it.
In order to move for the questions, I'll stop the share and bring us into speaker mode, shall I? Yeah.
I'm just going to jump in here and say thank you so much for a really rich and generous conversation. There's so much more to be said, so it feels a bit of a shame to cut it off here, but I think it's important. But it's important that I think we open it out to questions from the audience. And just to kick us off, I'm going to start with one of my own, if that's okay. Brooke, I really appreciated early on in the conversation when you were talking about this idea of like the queering of history, like through the quotidian debris of our daily lives. And I wondered, Flo, if you could pick up on this just in relation to the use of domestic materials in actually the making of the work. So the secondhand curtains and the used lino, and why it felt important to you to work with those kind of, grubby used materials rather than new materials or different materials.
I love that thing that quote that you said, Brooke. That's a really good question. Why did it feel important? I guess like lots of different reasons. Like for one of my starting points for the show, as you know, I talked to you about, Robert, was looking at this scrapbook I'd made as a young person. And this is like pre-internet scrapbook, and during section 28, and it's just, for me, it just sort of there was a lot in this sort of like, it was just like an old jotter that's like, cutouts of magazines and like little scrawly notes and stuff, but it's just the kind of something about, I guess, okay, so I'm going to try and see if I can pull these things together. There's something about I'm really interested in the materials that like surround us in like a kind of intimate, mostly domestic lives. So the things that like that are like important, they have like real value, and that felt important for this work because it was particularly kind of sort of, what's the word, like kind of close or kind of intimate. And I also was thinking about, as a younger person, I mean, there was a lot of kind of autobiographical stuff. I was thinking about, I've been taking tea for about 7 years now, and I was thinking about, wow, 7 years, that's like quite a long time. And as a younger person, my access to history, queer and trans histories, was basically non-existent. It wasn't, I didn't know about it, or it wasn't available to me, so I didn't really have that. And there's something about, when you're a younger person, you're at home, that's you're sat in your bedroom or whatever, and like that is the first place where you start like imagining and like a kind of future for yourself, or like you're imagining the possibilities of relationships and love and desire and all of that kind of stuff. And so there's something about that particular space, which I've also, one of the paintings is, it kind of is about that more explicitly. I wanted to use these materials because for me, it's so much about that experience, like what it feels like to be lying on your bed as a younger person, and to be, on this like horrible laminate flooring, and just these particular spaces that just have that sort of emotional register for me. It's a way for me to kind of get into the sort of particular experiences and memories that felt like really like, oh wow, yeah, that's something that's come up that I'd quite like to think about in relation to this painting. So the materials is just like, it made sense that I would use them, and I was quite excited to use different materials and make them the floor works, which are make kind of three-dimensional works that people could also like move around, and that just finding also different ways of taking painting, which is really the core of what I do, and then kind of finding ways to extend out into a space and sort of create a different kind of experience.
That's great. Thank you so much, Flo. And it feels very related to, I think, the Heather Love feeling backwards reference that Brooke pulled up in relation to this idea of like having to dream and space for dreaming. But it's really interesting that happens in a space that maybe you wouldn't always associate with being dreamy, right? Like a lino floor. But it's fascinating. So to pick up some of the other questions in the chat, as a question from Joe. So Joe says that it's beautiful to hear about the devotion, layering, and labour behind the works, and they're interested to hear from Flo about how it feels to share these works in that stead. So knowing that some of these historical or experiential threads might be lost to viewers, or that viewers will maybe create alternative histories as they encounter the works. How does that feel?
Oh, that's a really good question. How does it feel? I don't know, like all kinds of things. It makes me feel quite vulnerable, I suppose. There's lots of questions and things that I was thinking about constantly while making the work, that I was kind of asking of myself in relation to the ethics behind, or the kind of what's problematic about making work which is using history and sort of the material or kind of fragments that relate to people, like real people's lives that you will never get to meet, and you don't have those connections. And that, in terms of people say, encountering them and creating alternate narratives, or I don't know, how do I feel about that? I'm not really sure. I mean, I feel, I guess, uncomfortable, but also I know I don't have a great deal of, like, people will experience the work in the way that they do, and they will inevitably see things or interpret things in the way that, I don't know, that chimes with them, and that may have nothing to do with what's sort of interesting me, or what I'm trying to kind of maybe draw a kind of relationship towards or something. So yeah, it's not a very good answer, but I don't know. I really don't know how I feel about that.
I think that's a perfectly good answer. And there's another question from Stephen, which is asking about how the works are compiled on the surface. So they say that there's theatrics at play, they believe, Catholicism aside. And could you describe how or why you take what appears to be a collage approach to building up the painting?
I take a collage approach. I guess I'm really interested in layering, and in the trying to, it's a bit like what I talked about at the beginning, about like how I can get close to describing that sort of friction or the tension between things, like always being a kind of a relational thing, like always, like there's more than one thing, and it's about that relationship. And I guess layering, or thinking about, like I think about the paintings like collages, is a way for me to kind of, that process of kind of building something up, making space for something, letting something, kind of carving something out, and then sort of painting something in it, deciding to kind of wrap something. It's sort of a, I don't know how to describe it, other than like, I'm really interested in all of those relationships, and like in the like little intimacies between things, and how you can, the sort of the woodlouse that sort of, I don't know, walking on the top of a banana, and sort of that being close to this sort of larger kind of experience that's happening in the background, like that those two things can sort of, they both have value and meaning, that they're just different, and that those scales of, in terms of things that are kind of very sort of micro and macro, can exist at the same time. And I feel like layering for me, I don't know, I feel like I have more flexibility with that, and I can build things up, and I can construct it in a way that I can also be quite honest with that. Like I can just layer on top of things, and I don't need to kind of pretend it all sort of is sort of smooth and fits together in it. I'm more interested in like how things don't really fit, but we sort of make it work. I don't know whether that answers your question, Stephen, but yeah.
Thanks, Flo. I'm just going to do one more, and I think we have to wrap up. So the last question is from Nella, and they'd like to ask which works in Harmonycrumb are your favourites and why.
That's good. Favorites, I don't know, it changes all the time. Like sometimes I guess like Spider definitely feels like one of them. That's the one that has like two figures dancing, and one's wearing a bright orange t-shirt that says forget. That, because that was the first painting I made, and often the first painting is like it's sort of, then I start to kind of sort of splay out a bit, and I'm like, this sort of, then I start making kind of connections and things. And also that painting, I was thinking about the Vaults, which is a gay bar in Exeter in Devon, which was like the first sort of gay bar I mean, it's quite, I mean, it used to be quite a traditional kind of gay bar. Now I think I don't know, it's like an LGBTQ plus space, like kind of bar, club, cafe type thing. But yeah, that was an important space for me growing up. Not maybe in terms of like necessarily being like somewhere I wanted to be, but important in terms of like I discovered a lot of things about myself and the people I wanted to be around, the sort of friendships I wanted to make and stuff. So that one definitely feels like it is one of my favorites, but I don't know. And then probably I do really like the what's it called, French Apple, which is one of the assemblages with Joan of Arc's Sabaton. Is that how you describe it? I mean, that's how you pronounce it, Sabaton. Yeah,
I believe so.
Yeah.
Thanks, Flo. Brooke, sorry, all of the questions were in Flo's direction, but do you have any closing remarks that you'd like to add in at this point?
Oh, I mean, they should be in Flo's direction. So I'm very, as I said, as a fan, I'm a very happy listener.
That's great. So it just leaves it to me then to say thank you so much to both of you for this wonderful conversation. It's been really far ranging. I didn't think we'd get to Roman Catholicism, but we did, among many other things. And it's been wonderful to listen to both of you and to hear your contributions. So thanks for being so generous and so engaging. And thanks also to everyone else for joining us. Flo's exhibition is going to be on at Spike Island until the 10th of September. So I do hope you can all come to Bristol to see it if you haven't already. And please also look out for our upcoming programme on our website and by joining our newsletter. But for now, I'd just like to say thanks again and to wish everyone a lovely evening.
Thank you so much, everyone, for coming.